Before we open the classified files of 1985 and step onto the flight that changed the course of intelligence history, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us continue to uncover these forgotten stories from the shadows of the Cold War. In the autumn of 1985, the Central Intelligence Agency was bleeding. It was not a physical wound, but something far more dangerous in the silent arithmetic of espionage. They were losing secrets. Specifically, they were losing the acoustic signatures of the next generation of ballistic missile submarines. These were the crown jewels of American nuclear deterrence, the silent predators of the deep that were supposed to be undetectable. Yet reports coming out of the listening posts in the North Sea indicated that Soviet hunter-killer subs were appearing in sectors where they had no business being, waiting in the exact blind spots of American patrols. The hemorrhage was traced back to Washington, D.C., but the source was a ghost. Counterintelligence officers had spent 6 months tearing apart the Pentagon's naval procurement offices, auditing bank accounts and tapping phone lines. They found nothing. The leak was disciplined. He didn't buy flashy cars. He didn't meet handlers in dark alleys. He didn't drink to excess. He was, by all metrics, a phantom. His name, unknown to the hunters at the time, was Julian Thorne. Thorne was a 52-year-old senior analyst at the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. He was a man of beige suits and quiet lunches. He drove a 4-year-old Volvo and lived in a modest townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia. To his neighbors, he was a boring bureaucrat pushing paper. To the KGB, he was Agent Cobalt, and he was arguably the most valuable asset Moscow had inside the Beltway since the days of the atomic spies. Thorne's motivation wasn't ideology, nor was it the desperate financial need that drove so many others. It was a profound, festering resentment. He believed he was the smartest man in every room he entered, yet he had been passed over for promotion to assistant secretary 3 times. He felt the American system had failed to recognize his genius. The Soviets, conversely, told him exactly what he wanted to hear. They told him he was a visionary. They told him he was shaping history. And of course, they paid him. But the money was almost secondary to the validation. By October 1985, Thorne sensed the walls closing in. He didn't know specifically that the FBI was looking at his department, but he had the instinct of a prey animal that smells a shift in the wind. A colleague had been called in for a polygraph. A file he requested was delayed by 2 hours. Small things. Insignificant to an innocent man, but deafening alarms to a guilty one. Thorne made a decision that would trigger one of the most complex mobile surveillance operations in CIA history. He decided to run. He didn't bolt in the middle of the night. That was for amateurs. He planned a sanctioned trip. He was scheduled to attend a diplomatic summit on trade regulations in Frankfurt, Germany. It was a legitimate cover. He would fly commercial, carry his briefcase full of the final, most devastating documents he could steal, and once in Frankfurt, he would simply never show up to the conference. A car would be waiting at the airport to whisk him across the border to Czechoslovakia and from there to a dacha outside Moscow. The CIA caught a whisper of this plan not through electronic intercepts but through a stroke of luck. A defector in East Berlin mentioned that a high-value guest was expected in Moscow by mid-November. The date coincided perfectly with Thorne's travel itinerary. The agency couldn't arrest him yet. They didn't have hard evidence, only suspicion and a travel date. If they arrested him on the ground in D.C., he would claim the documents were for the conference. He had diplomatic immunity for his work papers. They needed to catch him in the act of handing them over. Or better yet, they needed him to confess his intent before he vanished behind the Iron Curtain. They couldn't put a team of agents on the plane without tipping him off. Thorne knew the face of every senior counterintelligence officer in Washington. He knew the surveillance teams. He would spot a tail. They needed someone he wouldn't look at twice. They needed someone who could stand 2 feet away from him for 7 hours, watch his every move, access his luggage, and control his environment, all while he thanked them for the service. They didn't need a spy who could fly a plane. They needed a spy who could serve coffee. Maya Sterling was not her real name, but it was the name on her badge. She was 34 years old, with an impeccable service record at Pan American World Airways. She was efficient, charming, and possessed a memory that could catalog the facial features of 300 passengers in a single boarding process. She was also a sleeper agent for the CIA's Special Activities Division. Maya had been recruited out of college. not for her ability to shoot a gun or crack a safe, but for her background in behavioral psychology and her linguistic aptitude. She spoke fluent German, Russian, and French. The agency had placed her in the airline industry 4 years prior as part of a long-term program designed to monitor the transit routes of international arms dealers and diplomats. The logic was sound. At 30,000 feet, targets were vulnerable. They drank alcohol. They slept. They left briefcases unguarded to use the lavatory. The cabin of a 747 was a closed ecosystem where a trained observer could learn more about a man in 6 hours than a surveillance van could learn in 6 weeks. On November 10, 1985, Maya was on layover in New York when her pager buzzed. The code displayed was a sequence she had memorized but never expected to see. It was an immediate recall. Priority Alpha. She was directed to a safe house in Brooklyn, where she met with a handler known only as Control. The briefing was intense. Control laid out the profile of Julian Thorne. Photographs of his face from every angle. Details of his diet, his reading habits, his nervous tics. Maya was told that Thorne would be booking a seat on Pan Am Flight 106 from Washington Dulles to Frankfurt in 2 days. "We cannot touch him on the ground," Control explained, the smoke from his cigarette curling under the low lamp. "He's carrying a diplomatic pouch. Technically, it's inviolable, but we know he's carrying personal copies of the Trident submarine schematics in a secondary briefcase mixed with his personal effects. He's paranoid. He will keep that bag close. We need to know where it is, if he opens it, and who he talks to. We suspect he has a shadow." "A shadow?" Maya asked, studying the grainy photo of Thorne. "A KGB escort, someone on the plane to make sure he gets to Frankfurt and doesn't get cold feet. We don't know who the shadow is. If Thorne spots a tail, he aborts. If the shadow spots a tail, Thorne might not make it off the plane alive. The Soviets are cleaning house. If they think he's compromised, they'll silence him." Maya's mission was threefold. First, ensure Thorne remained calm and on the flight. Second, identify the KGB shadow among the other passengers. Third, if the opportunity presented itself, confirm the presence of the stolen documents without breaking cover. The agency pulled strings at Pan Am Corporate. The roster for Flight 106 was quietly manipulated. A senior flight attendant was given a sudden, all-expenses-paid vacation, and Maya Sterling was slotted in as the purser for the first-class cabin. The next 48 hours were a blur of preparation. Maya didn't just study the mission, she had to study the service. She had to be flawless. A spy who spills coffee is a bad spy, but a flight attendant who spills coffee is just incompetent. Incompetence draws attention. She needed to be invisible. She memorized the layout of the Boeing 747-100, the specific service protocols for the dinner course, and the emergency procedures. But she also memorized the blind spots in the cabin mirrors, the acoustics of the lavatories, and the gaps between the seats where a listening device could be planted in seconds. She was given a specialized kit, a lipstick case that contained a high-resolution miniature camera, a serving tray with a false bottom that could weigh the contents of a briefcase if it was placed upon it, and a contact lens case that held a dissolvable sedative, purely for emergency use. As she stood in front of the mirror in the safe house, adjusting her uniform and pinning her wings to her lapel, Maya Sterling ceased to be an intelligence officer. She became the smiling face of American aviation, the person everyone looked at, but nobody truly saw. November 12, 1985. Dulles International Airport was a cathedral of modernist architecture, a sweeping curve of concrete and glass. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of floor wax and jet fuel. Julian Thorne arrived at the terminal 3 hours early. He was sweating, despite the chill in the air. He wore a gray wool coat and gripped the handle of a dark brown leather attaché case with white-knuckled intensity. From a monitoring post in the janitorial closet near the check-in counters, a CIA technical team watched him through a fiber-optic camera feed. They relayed his movements to Maya, who was already on board the aircraft, prepping the galley. "Target is at the counter." The voice in Maya's earpiece crackled. "He's checking one bag, keeping the attaché. He's looking over his shoulder every 10 seconds. Heart rate is likely through the roof. He's jumpy, Maya. Handle with care." Thorne moved through the terminal like a man walking on a tightrope. To the casual observer, he was just another businessman dreading a long flight. But Maya knew better. She knew that inside his mind, he was already in Moscow. He was replaying the promises the KGB recruiter had made him, the dasha, the respect, the history books that would be written about him. But fear is a potent chemical. What if the ticket was flagged? What if the gate agent smiled too widely? Thorn reached the gate. He sat in the corner, his back to the wall. He placed the attaché case on his lap, his arms crossed over it protectively. He watched the other passengers. A young mother with an infant, a group of German tourists laughing loudly, an elderly couple holding hands. He scanned them all, looking for the telltale signs of the FBI, the earpieces, the shoes that were too practical, the gaze that lingered too long. He saw nothing, just the mundane chaos of travel. He began to relax, just a fraction. Meanwhile, Maya was scanning the manifest. Seat 4A, a window seat in first class. It offered privacy, which was exactly what a man like Thorn would want. But it also trapped him. He would have to climb over the aisle passenger to move. The aisle seat, 4B, was empty on the manifest, blocked by the agency to give Maya easier access to him. But at the last minute, a booking had come through. A diplomat from the Austrian embassy. The agency couldn't bump him without causing a scene. Maya would have to work around him. The boarding call began. First-class passengers were invited to board. Thorn stood up instantly, almost knocking over his chair. He wanted to be on the plane. He wanted the doors to close. The terminal felt exposed. The metal tube of the 747 felt like a sanctuary. As Thorn walked down the jet bridge, the transition from American soil to international airspace began in his mind. He stepped onto the plane. Maya was there at the door. Her smile was radiant, practiced, and completely hollow. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, her eyes instantly locking onto the attaché case. It was heavy. The leather was strained at the seams. "Can I help you find your seat?" Thorn didn't make eye contact. He muttered, "4A," and brushed past her, clutching the case. Maya watched him go, her mind racing. He was terrified. That made him dangerous, but it also made him prone to mistakes. As she turned to greet the next passenger, she noticed a man in a tan raincoat. He was tall, with the sharp, angular features of a hawk. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at the cockpit. His eyes were fixed on the back of Julian Thorn's head. He walked past her, his boarding pass clutched in a gloved hand. Seat 12C, business class, just a few rows behind Thorn. Maya tapped her earpiece discreetly. "Control," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "I think we found the shadow. Seat 12C. Verify identity." The game was afoot. They were locked in a pressurized aluminum canister at 30,000 feet, and the hunt had begun. The Boeing 747 roared down the runway, the immense power of the engines pressing the passengers into their seats. For Julian Thorn, the sensation was euphoric. Every foot of altitude put distance between him and the FBI. As the landing gear retracted with a heavy thud, he let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 6 months. He was safe. He was leaving. In the galley, Maya was already working. She wasn't just preparing drinks. She was setting the stage. The flight to Frankfurt was 8 hours. She needed to establish a rapport with Thorn quickly, but without seeming intrusive. She grabbed a bottle of vintage champagne and a stack of warm towels. She moved down the aisle of the first-class cabin. The atmosphere was hushed. The lights dimmed. Thorn was staring out the window at the receding lights of the East Coast. The darkness of the Atlantic Ocean lay ahead. "Champagne, sir?" Maya asked, her voice soft. Thorn jumped slightly, his hand instinctively clamping down on the briefcase that sat on the floor between his legs. He looked up at her, his eyes darting to her name tag. "No. No alcohol. Water. Just water." "Sparkling or still?" "Still. No ice." "Of course." Maya noted the rejection of alcohol. Unusual for a nervous flyer, but typical for a man who needed to keep his wits sharp. He was disciplined. She placed the water on his tray table and let her gaze drift to the briefcase for a fraction of a second. It was positioned oddly, wedged against the fuselage wall, creating a barrier. She moved to the aisle passenger, the Austrian diplomat, who happily accepted the champagne. As she poured, she used the reflection in the bottle to watch Thorn. He wasn't drinking the water. He was checking his watch. Over and over again. Back in the galley, Maya checked in with the team on the ground. The plane's satellite link allowed for burst transmissions, short, encrypted text messages sent to a receiver in the cockpit. The pilot, Captain Miller, was aware of the operation, but not the specifics. He handed Maya a slip of paper that had printed out on the Navcom unit. Target 12C ID confirmed. Viktor Volkov, KGB 2nd Directorate. Specialist in exfiltration and liquidation. Extreme caution. Do not engage. Maya crumpled the paper and swallowed it. Liquidator. That changed the calculus entirely. Volkov wasn't just a watcher. He was a cleaner. If Thorne panicked, or if Volkov suspected Thorne was going to defect back to the Americans or surrender, Volkov would kill him right there in seat 4A. A heart attack induced by a contact poison. A choking incident. The KGB had a dozen ways to kill a man in a crowded room without anyone realizing it until the body cooled. Maya realized that her job wasn't just to catch a mole anymore. It was to keep him alive long enough to be arrested. She had to place herself between the wolf and the sheep, armed only with a coffee pot and her wits. She peeked through the curtain separating first and business class. Volkov was in 12C, sitting upright, reading a German newspaper. He had a clear line of sight to the back of Thorne's seat. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating. He was on guard. Maya returned to the first-class cabin. She needed to separate Thorne from that briefcase even for a minute. If she could weigh it or scan it with the detector in her tray, she could confirm the presence of the dense microfilm bundles. "Mr. Thorne?" She approached him again. "I noticed your bag is blocking the emergency egress path. I'm terribly sorry, but FAA regulations require us to stow it in the overhead bin for the duration of the flight." This was a lie. The bag was fine where it was. It was a test. Thorne looked at her with sudden ferocity. "It stays with me. It contains medical equipment. I need it close." "I understand, sir," Maya said, backing off immediately with a placating smile. "If it's medical, that's an exception. My apologies." Medical equipment. Another lie. But it confirmed the bag was the payload. He wouldn't let it out of his grip. She would have to be smarter. She would have to wait for him to make a mistake. 3 hours into the flight. The cabin was dark. Most passengers were asleep, lulled by the drone of the engines. The movie was playing, some forgettable comedy that flickered on the screen at the front of the cabin. Thorne was not sleeping. He had opened the briefcase. Maya was in the galley, watching through the slit in the curtain. He had cracked the lid only a few inches. He was using a small penlight to read something inside. It was risky behavior, but paranoia demands reassurance. He needed to verify the documents were still there, that the passport was valid, that his life insurance was intact. Maya grabbed a fresh bottle of water and walked down the aisle. She moved silently, her shoes designed for stealth. As she approached row 4, she slowed down. Thorne was engrossed. She could see the edge of a document, top secret stamps, the red border of classified naval intelligence. She needed an image. She reached into her pocket and palmed the lipstick camera. It was a piece of CIA wizardry. Twisting the base didn't raise lipstick. It snapped a high-speed photo through a lens no larger than a pinhead. "More water, Mr. Thorne," she whispered, leaning over him. Thorne slammed the case shut with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. He looked up, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "You startled me," he hissed. "I apologize, sir. I just saw your light was on." Maya kept her hand steady, the lipstick case hovering near the tray table. Click. She hoped she got the shot. "I'm fine. Leave me alone," Thorne snapped. "Certainly." As she turned, she saw movement in the row behind. Volkov. He was standing up. He had seen Thorne snap the case shut. He had seen the interaction. He was moving toward the lavatory at the front of the cabin, which would force him to pass Thorne's seat. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was a brush pass or a check-in, or a threat. Volkov walked slowly up the aisle. As he passed seat 4A, he stumbled, a fake turbulent slip. His hand came down on Thorne's shoulder. It looked like an accident to everyone else, but Maya saw the grip. It was hard, a warning squeeze. "Excuse me," Volkov muttered in English with a heavy accent. Thorne didn't look up. He froze, terrified. Volkov continued to the lavatory and locked the door. Maya returned to the galley and let out a shaky breath. The message was clear. Stop acting suspicious. You are drawing attention. She checked the lipstick camera. She wouldn't know if the image was good until they landed, but she had verified the behavior. Thorne was cracking. Volkov was watching. The dynamic in the cabin was shifting from a transport mission to a hostage situation. Suddenly, the plane lurched. Real turbulence this time. The seatbelt sign pinged on. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some rough air." The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Please return to your seats." Volkov emerged from the lavatory. He had to walk back to row 12. He glared at Thorne as he passed. Thorne was gripping the armrests, his eyes shut tight. The turbulence worsened. The plane dropped 100 feet in a second, shaking violently. In the galley, pots rattled. This wasn't part of the plan, but Maya realized it was an opportunity. Fear makes people irrational. Fear breaks down defenses. The turbulence lasted for 20 minutes, a violent shaking that turned the cabin into a paint shaker. When the air finally smoothed out, the passengers were rattled. The Austrian diplomat in 4B was pale. Thorne looked like he was about to be sick. I need to use the restroom," Thorne stammered, unbuckling his belt. "Sir, the light is still on," Maya said gently. "I don't care. I'm going to be sick." He stood up, clutching the briefcase. He wouldn't leave it. He stumbled toward the forward lavatory, the one Volkov had just used. Maya watched him go. This was critical. Why take the briefcase to the toilet? There was no room. Unless he was going to destroy something, or hide something. Thorne locked himself in. Maya waited 10 seconds, then moved to the lavatory door. She pulled a small out-of-order sign from her apron pocket. As soon as Thorne came out, she would slap it on the door and lock it from the outside, preserving the scene for a search. She stood by the door, listening. She could hear the rustle of paper, the sound of a toilet flushing. Not a sick passenger, a disposal. The door clicked open. Thorne emerged, looking flushed but relieved. He was still holding the briefcase. "Feeling better, sir?" "Yes," he muttered, pushing past her. Maya immediately slipped inside the lavatory and locked the door. She slapped the occupied sign on the latch. She scanned the small room. Nothing in the trash, nothing on the counter. She lifted the toilet lid. The water was clear. She checked the paper towel dispenser. She ran her hands under the sink basin. Nothing. Then she saw it. A tiny smudge of ink on the mirror near the bottom edge, and a scratch on the metal paneling behind the trash bin. She pulled out a multi-tool from her kit and unscrewed the panel. Behind the bin, wedged into the metal frame of the fuselage, was a small folded index card. She retrieved it with tweezers. It wasn't a document, it was a note, written in rushed handwriting. "Vienna is compromised. New route, Prague direct. Do not exit terminal." It wasn't something Thorne had written, it was something he had retrieved. Volkov. When Volkov had used the lavatory earlier, he had left a dead drop. Thorne hadn't gone in to destroy evidence. He had gone in to get his new orders. The turbulence had given him the excuse to move. Maya realized the brilliance of it. They weren't speaking. They were using the plane's infrastructure to communicate. She photographed the note, then placed it back exactly where she found it. If she took it, Thorne would know the CIA was on board. She had to let him believe he was safe, but now she knew the end game. They weren't going to the hotel in Frankfurt. They were going to try to transfer in the transit zone to a flight for Prague. She exited the lavatory and unlocked it. She walked back to the galley and typed a frantic message to the cockpit. Target received new instructions. Diverting to Prague from Frankfurt terminal. Intercept required at gate. The pilot sent a reply 2 minutes later. Understood. Ground team notified. Hold tight. The sun began to rise over the Atlantic, painting the clouds in hues of violet and gold. The breakfast service began. The smell of coffee and heated pastries filled the cabin. It was a comforting smell, one that usually signaled the end of a long journey. But in the cockpit, plans were changing. A coded message came in from Langley. They couldn't risk a standoff in the Frankfurt terminal. The transit zone was a legal gray area, and if Volkov and Thorne made it to a Soviet block gate, the CIA would have no jurisdiction. They would lose him. They needed the plane to land somewhere else, somewhere the CIA controlled completely. "Cabin crew, this is the captain." Miller's voice was calm, practiced. "We've had a minor indication on one of our hydraulic systems. Nothing to worry about. Safety is not compromised. However, company policy requires us to land at the nearest maintenance hub for a quick check. We will be diverting to RAF Mildenhall in the United Kingdom. We apologize for the delay." RAF Mildenhall, a U.S. Air Force base in England? It was a brilliant lie. To the passengers, it was a nuisance. To Thorne and Volkov, it was a catastrophe. Maya watched row 4. Thorne froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. He looked around wildly. Diverting? To a military base? He knew. He turned around and looked at row 12. Volkov was already standing up. The KGB agent's face was a mask of cold fury. He knew exactly what this was. A maintenance issue that landed a high-value target on friendly soil was the oldest trick in the book. Volkov moved. He wasn't going to the bathroom this time. He was coming for Thorne. Maya stepped into the aisle, blocking the path. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is on. You need to sit down." Volkov looked at her. For a moment, Maya saw the killer behind the eyes. He calculated the odds of snapping her neck and getting to Thorne before the marshals on the plane could react. "I need to speak to my colleague," Volkov said, gesturing to Thorne. "I'm afraid that's not possible during descent, sir. Please take your seat." Maya didn't flinch. She stood tall, projecting an authority she didn't feel. Volkov hesitated. He looked at the other passengers who were watching the commotion. He looked at the other flight attendants who were now watching him. He was exposed. If he made a scene, he would be arrested instantly upon landing for interfering with a flight crew, a federal offense. He slowly backed down. He sat in 12C and buckled his belt. But his eyes never left Maya. He marked her. Thorne, meanwhile, was hyperventilating. He realized the trap had sprung. He was being delivered directly into the hands of the U.S. military. He clutched the briefcase to his chest like a life preserver in a storm. The descent into Mildenhall was steep. The plane banked hard. Through the windows, the passengers could see the green patchwork of the English countryside, and then the long gray runways of the airbase. There were no other civilian planes, just KC-135 tankers and C-130 transports, and a line of black sedans waiting on the tarmac. Maya went to Thorne. He was shaking uncontrollably. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dropping the flight attendant persona for the first time. It was the voice of Agent Sterling now. "Listen to me very carefully." Thorne looked up, tears in his eyes. "The man in 12C is Viktor Volkov. He is KGB. He has a capsule in his pocket intended for you. If you walk off this plane with him, you will never reach Moscow. You will die in a transit van before you leave the airport." Thorne stared at her, the reality crashing down. Who are you?" "I'm your best chance of seeing your children again," Maya said. "When we land, do not stand up. Do not look at him. Wait for my signal." Thorne nodded, a broken man. The wheels touched down. The reverse thrusters roared. The plane slowed and taxied toward the isolated corner of the airfield where the black cars waited. The captain came on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Authorities will be boarding the aircraft to process our arrival." Volkov unbuckled his seatbelt before the light went off. He stood up. He reached into his jacket pocket. Maya shouted, "Stay seated!" Volkov lunged, not toward Thorne, but toward the emergency exit door over the wing. He popped the cover and pulled the handle. The door blew outward, the emergency slide inflating with a hiss and a bang. The cabin erupted in screams. Cold air rushed in. Volkov vaulted out the door, sliding down the chute to the tarmac. He knew he couldn't get Thorne, so he was saving himself. He was going to make a run for the perimeter fence. "Secure the cabin!" Maya yelled to the other flight attendants. She looked out the window. Volkov hit the tarmac running, but he didn't get far. The black sedans were already moving. 2 armored vehicles cut him off. Men in tactical gear swarmed him. Volkov raised his hands, then dropped to his knees. It was over. The arrest of Julian Thorne was quiet. 2 men in suits boarded the plane through the front door. They walked to seat 4A. Thorne didn't resist. He handed over the briefcase. He stood up, his legs shaky, and allowed them to handcuff him. As he was led away, he stopped and looked at Maya. She was standing by the galley, her hands folded, back to being the flight attendant. "Thank you," he whispered. He wasn't thanking her for arresting him. He was thanking her for saving him from Volkov. Maya didn't respond. She just nodded. The rest of the passengers were debriefed. They were told it was a security incident involving a fugitive. They were transferred to another plane and flown to Frankfurt 3 hours later. Maya didn't go with them. Her mission was done. She walked down the steps to the tarmac, the wind whipping her hair. A man in a trench coat was waiting for her by one of the cars. It was Control. "Good work, Sterling," he said. "We got the briefcase. The Trident plans are there, and we got Volkov. He's going to be a goldmine of information." "Thorne?" Maya asked. "He's already cutting a deal. Life in prison in exchange for a full damage assessment. He'll talk." Maya looked up at the massive 747, the stage for the most intense 8 hours of her life. "I need a vacation," she said. "You have a flight to Rio on Tuesday." Control smiled. "South American cartel movement. We need eyes on a courier." Maya sighed, but a small smile touched her lips. "Is it first class?" "Economy," Control said. "Sorry." Maya laughed. She unpinned her wings and put them in her pocket. "Let's go." The interrogation of Julian Thorne took place in a bunker beneath the U.S. Embassy in London before he was extradited to the States. The transcripts revealed the depth of the betrayal. He had stolen over 4,000 pages of classified documents over 2 years. The damage to the submarine program was estimated in the billions of dollars. But the most interesting part of the file was his description of the flight. Interrogator: "When did you know it was over?" Thorne: "When the flight attendant told me the man behind me was going to kill me." I looked in her eyes. It wasn't a service smile anymore. It was certainty. I realized I was caught between a prison cell and a coffin. I chose the cell. Viktor Volkov was never charged publicly. He was quietly exchanged on a bridge in Berlin 6 months later for 3 American pilots and a captured journalist. That is the way of the Cold War. Spies are currency. Maya Sterling returned to her life as a flight attendant. She flew for another 6 years, tracking targets across the globe. She never made the headlines. She never got a medal that she could wear in public. Her victories were silent, celebrated only in the classified annexes of CIA files. But every time she poured a cup of coffee for a nervous businessman clutching a briefcase a little too tightly, she remembered Flight 106. She remembered that the most dangerous place on Earth isn't a battlefield or a dark alley. It's Seat 4A, with nowhere left to run. The intelligence gathered from Thorne's briefcase allowed the U.S. Navy to alter the patrol patterns of the Trident fleet before the Soviets could capitalize on the stolen data. It was a massive strategic victory. The Thorne deviation, as it came to be known in naval tactics, likely prevented a catastrophic shift in the balance of nuclear power. The operation also changed CIA tradecraft. The Sky High program was expanded. More agents were placed on commercial flights. The friendly skies became a net, catching defectors, couriers, and terrorists. For Maya, the mission was a defining moment. It proved that human intelligence, the ability to read fear, to manipulate psychology, to act with empathy even when hunting a traitor, was superior to any satellite or wiretap. She eventually retired from fieldwork in 1991, just as the Soviet Union collapsed. She took a desk job training the next generation of officers. She taught a course called Environmental Psychology in Confined Spaces. Her first lesson was always the same. Look at the hands. The eyes can lie, the mouth can lie, but the hands always tell the truth. Years later, an old man sat on a park bench in Northern Virginia. It was Julian Thorne, released on compassionate grounds due to failing health after serving 30 years. He watched the planes climbing out of Dulles, soaring into the clouds. A woman sat down next to him. She was older now, her hair gray, but her eyes were sharp. Thorne looked at her. He squinted, trying to place the face. "Sparkling or still?" she asked softly. Thorne froze. Then a slow, rueful smile spread across his face. "Still," he said. "No ice." Maya Sterling nodded. They sat in silence for a long time. 2 relics of a war that was fought in the shadows, watching the world move on without them. "You saved my life," Thorne said finally. "I never thanked you properly." "You gave us the codes," Maya replied. "We're even." She stood up, patted him on the shoulder, and walked away. Thorne watched her go, disappearing into the crowd, just one more face in the stream of humanity. The Cold War was over. The wall had fallen. But for those who played the game, the flight never really ended.